Hey guys, welcome back again to another episode of Healthy Design. We're going to continue our discussion on insulin. Today we're going to see how it correlates with reproductive health. A lot of people probably wouldn't think insulin plays much of a role at all with reproductive health, but it plays a pretty significant role. One way to kind of think about it is we need good metabolic health to have good reproductive health. Um, if our metabolic health is impaired, then it's going to lead to impairment of our reproductive health for many reasons. One way to think about it too is if a woman is getting pregnant or wants to get pregnant, she's going to have to be able to supply the needs for herself and that developing fetus. So if there's any issue going on where metabolic function isn't that good, then she's going to need more reserves just to manage her own health. There's not going to be those reserves left over for the developing fetus. And so it's a very costly process. I mean, it takes a lot to grow another human inside of you. And so we want to make sure we have all those reserves. We want to make sure we're as healthy as we can be. And insulin obviously plays a big role in our metabolic health and how we store energy, use energy, etc. So that's how I can start to kind of play a role there. Remember, we talked about too that insulin sends growth signals. It's an anabolic hormone in nature. This is a great thing when we're talking about reproductive health. That increase in insulin can actually help the placenta to grow, which is going to help have the nutrients for the developing fetus. One thing women don't like during this time, though, is that insulin is also going to lead to more body fat on hips and thighs. The insulin will actually increase its receptors on body fat, so it can deposit more body fat in those areas. And again, women don't like that part, but this is a natural thing to occur, and there's a good reason for it. Once you do deliver the baby, breastfeeding, taking care of the baby is another very energy costly experience. And so that's doing is helping to put some of those reserves down and develop those throughout pregnancy so that those reserves can be used when you're breastfeeding and taking care of the baby afterwards. So it's a very good thing that happens. I get it may not be that fun when you're going through it, but just look at what it's trying to do for you. And it's just the way the body's kind of adapted and accommodated the things to help everything be successful. Um, so the other good thing too is those growth signals later on will actually help the baby to develop too. So insulin can play a big role in those things. We want that normal development. We definitely don't want too much. We don't want too little. Goldilocks kind of rule. Um, with insulin resistance, it's natural for women to become more insulin resistant toward the end of their pregnancy than they were at the beginning. This is termed physiological insulin resistance, and it's a good thing. Again, it helps with all those growth factors, to help prepare the mom, help prepare the baby, the placenta, etc. So it's a good thing. If glucose control is lost, then that physiological insulin resistance can turn into more of a pathological insulin resistance, and this is gestational diabetes. There are different risk factors for it: age, ethnicity, previously being diagnosed with diabetes are a couple, but that's something obviously we would like to avoid. If you can't, then there's ways that it can be managed to help the pregnancy be successful and you take care of the mom and the baby, which is a good thing. I do want to note though that if what they found with some research, if a woman does develop gestational diabetes during pregnancy, she's 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes later in life versus versus a mother who didn't develop gestational diabetes in the first place. Gestational diabetes can also lower milk supply, so that can have an impact later on as well. Another issue is preeclampsia. This is one of the most lethal complications in pregnancy. It's related to the kidneys. They get a dysfunction that creates a big impact on things. The kidneys are very sensitive to blood pressure changes, and as we talked about before, insulin resistance can lead to increased blood pressure because there's decreased nitric oxide production, which leads to vasoconstriction. So you got a smaller area for that same amount of volume. It can lead to hypertrophy of that inner wall of the blood vessel, which again constricts it. So there's more pressure for that same amount of fluid going through. So that could be part of it. Another possibility is that placenta, it needs more blood. And so what it will send out is vascular endothelial growth factor, VEGF, and that helps to create new blood vessels coming to it and going from it so it can get all the nutrients it needs and send those out. So if the insulin levels are too high, the placenta unfortunately will also release this soluble VEGF. It's termed different things. In this case, we're going to say receptor. So soluble VEGF receptor. Basically, it binds to that VEGF and makes it useless. And so this can have an impact on the kidneys because the kidneys need that vascular endothelial growth factor, that VEGF as well, so that they can function properly. And so if they're not getting that, now they're not going to be able to function as well. And so if it gets high enough, you can actually have leaky kidneys. So now toxins, from the blood are getting toxins and protein from the blood are getting into the urine, and you can see it there. Trying to check over my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything. Sorry. All right. So, yeah, the other thing with that, not having that VEGF for the kidneys, now you're going to have increased fluid, which is going to increase that blood pressure more, and then that can lead to more damage and end up creating more problems. And so, one other thing too with insulin and different things related to birth weight and future weight. For everything I'm going to discuss here, though, be clear, we're talking about changes versus what would be expected or typical. There's a big range in normal birth weight. Certain people will be on the lower side, that just, because you'll kind of see it with certain families, like they tend to have big babies. All their babies are very, healthy and weigh a lot. But then you have other families where they tend to be on the smaller side, but they're all very healthy. So when I'm talking about low birth weight or high birth weight, we're talking in relation to what would be expected or typical for that family. There was a study with the famine after like World War II, so I think it was Dutch famine. And so what you found there, and that's, if depending on kind of when or during the pregnancy the famine occurred, it would change the birth weight of the baby and their future health. And so what can happen if the baby's growing up in this glucose rich and insulin rich environment, it can lead to that baby being heavier, and so a higher birth weight than what would typically be expected. And that higher birth weight, that higher weight can carry into the teenage years and later on. There's about a 40% chance of that. So what's interesting though is the lower birth weight, than what's expected. That's when you're much more likely to be heavier later on. So what they found in that case with some of the studies is that even by the age of 4, it's possible for those lower birth weight kids to catch up to their peers and even surpass them. That again seems to be more kind of like this accommodative factor for the body. It was having it, kind of grow up in this environment where it couldn't get the nutrients that it needed. That's why it was smaller when the baby was born, but it kind of made some adjustments to be able to absorb things or get as much as possible, and then that leads to these issues later on. So, the reason for doing that was a good thing because it did help with survival. Didn't necessarily help with long-term health, but if you don't survive right now, there's no point for the long-term side. So kind of look at things maybe that way, and it'll help to make a little bit more sense. PCOS is another thing. We won't do a deep dive into PCOS. That would take a long time. Already been talking for a good bit just with this part. So there's 4 types of PCOS. We're not going into all of those right now. Insulin resistance definitely plays a role in PCOS. Insulin in our bodies, it actually will help to aromatize androgens, so testosterone, into estrogens. And for a woman's cycle, she needs, that spike in estrogen later on that helps with ovulation. And if that doesn't occur, so if those estrogen levels are low, they don't get high enough, then there's not going to be ovulation. And so again, for women, they need testosterone. They have that as well. They need certain levels there, but they need that level to be where it needs to be, and they need to convert some of that testosterone into estrogens to help make sure those estrogen levels are high, to have a normal, healthy period and have ovulation and then be able to get pregnant. The other thing too is insulin by itself may block luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone also plays a key role in ovulation. So again, if it's not occurring, there is no egg, there is nothing to fertilize, and then there can be no pregnancy. So with all these things, what we're seeing is there's more testosterone than what should be there, more androgens than what should be there naturally for a woman. There's lower estrogens than what should be there normally for a woman. So this can lead to more male characteristics. So you can see like differences with facial and body hair, and you can also get some dark patches of the skin. That's something you'll see quite often with PCOS as well. So again, reproductive health for men, a whole lot simpler for them than it is for women. For men, the two things we tend to see is sperm production, so issues with that, and erectile dysfunction. And a lot of times testosterone is blamed for this, and I'm not saying it has no part in that. What I wonder about though is it the chicken or the egg, or is it both? What I mean by that is, we know that the higher body fat someone has, the lower their testosterone levels are going to be. And so again, testosterone is often blamed for people having a lack of energy and higher body fat levels. But we know the higher your body fat level is, the lower your testosterone levels are going to be. And if you lose body fat, your testosterone levels will go up. And then there was one study done that showed that insulin, independent of body fat, did block testosterone. So if those levels, if testosterone levels get below normal, we're not going to be able to produce sperm. The other thing too is we have some of the same hormones, and we tend to think only women have all those hormones, but no, we have them too. So insulin, again, having that input or that effect on luteinizing hormone, that can have an effect on men as well, because we have luteinizing hormone. And so it's just that impact on testosterone itself, on other hormones coming from the brain that are involved in the sperm production, that can lead to these changes too. And so all this shows is that we need to try to be as healthy as we can. Like I said, in that case, it's really easy to look at testosterone. Oh, well, that's the issue. Let's put them on TRT and everything's fixed. That probably will help a lot of those things, because it'll get those levels up, at least testosterone levels up. May not affect the brain hormones too much. It could, because there are some feedback loops there. But maybe if they are overweight, their metabolic function's not working as well as it should. Maybe if we worked on that, and maybe their testosterone levels would come up naturally, the brain hormones would come up naturally, everything would function properly and not need the testosterone replacement. It's a thought. I think it's going to probably vary for everybody. There's probably going to be some people where that's going to work perfectly. There's going to be others that are going to need that plus a little bit of TRT, and that's going to work perfectly. Others are going to need the TRT, and that's going to be what they need. And then there's some where there may not be anything you can do. That tends to be the way things work with everything. You have people that respond really well, people that respond okay, people that respond very little, and people that don't respond at all or respond negatively. That's the way it works for everything, no matter what we're talking about. So I tried to keep this short. Hopefully it wasn't too short, gave you enough information for things to make sense. But you can kind of see how insulin plays a role in that reproductive function. And again, we want to be as healthy as we can be metabolically, because that's where energy production comes from. All of our cells need energy to function correctly. If that's impaired, they're going to be impaired. And if you get enough cells in a tissue that are impaired, then you're going to have tissue dysfunction, organ dysfunction on down the line. So anyway, that's it for today, guys. Hope you're enjoying this. We'll keep going down, the different systems in our body and how insulin plays a role there, and then we'll get into different things we can do to address this. All right, guys, take care. Have a good one. Bye.